joining us. Just a quick heads up, we're still waiting on quite a few people joining the webinar this morning, so we're just going to give everyone a couple of minutes before we get started. So just bear with us. Welcome everyone to the Access Planet GDPR Checklist for Training Companies webinar. Just a quick caveat before we do get started. Please be aware that today's session does not constitute legal advice. We're only sharing with you best practice which can help you on the road to GDPR compliance. We are not legal advisors. So we're going to start today's session with a quick poll, which you'll be able to see on screen shortly. We're then going to move on to looking at the 5 key areas of the General Data Protection Regulation, how you can apply the GDPR principles to your training business. We'll then explore some of our GDPR-friendly software features, and we're going to finish off today's session with a quick Q&A. So please direct any questions you may have to the questions box. We'll pick out the most frequently asked questions to answer during today's session. So I'm just going to give you a couple of minutes now just to complete that poll, and then we'll have a quick review of that, and then I'll pass you over to my colleague Andrew, who's going to take you through the rest of today's session. Okay, so quite interesting responses there. I can see that the majority of you feel that you're somewhat prepared, and it's quite interesting that does actually marry up quite nicely with our general training industry report that we're going to publish later in the year, where most people said 80% of training organisations said that they are prepared for GDPR. So hopefully, everyone who is currently somewhat prepared, by the time you finish today's session, you should have a better understanding of exactly where you need to be and exactly what you need to do in order to sort of move up from somewhat to extremely. And just to give you a little bit more information on that survey, actually 41% of the people who sort of responded to that said that they were looking at sales and marketing as their biggest challenge, reforming current data processing procedures, and indeed sort of data retention policy, which we will touch on today actually during today's session. And if you're interested in actually getting hold of a copy of that report, then please do fill in the survey itself, which you can find in as a reminder for this webinar, which was sent out yesterday. So as I say, if you are interested in getting a copy of that report, please do fill in that survey. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to pass you over to Andrew, who's going to take you through the rest of today's session.
Right, thank you very much, Joe. Thanks for the introduction there. Yeah, interesting results from that poll. I'm very pleased to see a lot of you are obviously well on the road to compliance, which is great. So, what we're going to be, Joe's given you a bit of an agenda there, but let's start, I guess, by talking more broadly about GDPR. I think for a lot of people, it's this 4-letter acronym that probably terrifies us a little bit. And I think the way it's been presented in the media and beyond probably hasn't done us any favours. So, I mean, this on your screen here, you'll be able to see this is from the usually more level-headed BBC News. Obviously, a bit of a shock article here. Could new data laws end up bankrupting your company? And there's been a lot of that people have heard about, so it's very much around the fines rather than what GDPR was really designed for. So another good source usually of scaremongering, if you like, is of course LinkedIn. So a lot of you will use that. And I've got a few, just over the last couple of weeks, I've just been looking at the sort of things people have been posting on LinkedIn about GDPR. I'll actually start with an example here of one which is a good question actually. So this person here, obviously admitting that they're not quite ready in their entirety for GDPR, but does it mean that if they use Excel spreadsheets that they are not GDPR compliant? Now, a lot of software companies who perhaps are a bit more unscrupulous than ourselves may say things like this. We'll talk more about that later on. Of course, probably a lot of you will know that that is not the case. The answer to him is don't worry, yeah, that doesn't mean he's not GDPR compliant. And then we've got ones that are a bit more sort of shock. So I'll let you read through this one. Suddenly, according to this person, the backbone of the internet domain name system is completely illegal according to Europe. I'm not going to comment on that one at the moment. But still a bit of thinking behind that one, through to the people who are straight in, completely panicked 1 month ago till GDPR, and then the world, will change forever. So again, it's interesting to see out there on social media what people are thinking about it all. So some people probably take a more level-headed approach than others. So I think really the starting point for me today is to talk more generally about what it's designed to do. And what I've actually got, I suppose, on the screen here this is from the head of the Information Commissioner's Office, Elizabeth Denham. She's got a good article actually on a blog about GDPR myths, which are sort of debunked and busted. And I think, again, the way it's been presented to a lot of people, it's all about fines. So I'm just actually going to read a quote from that blog, really useful to read. And effectively it says, this law is not about fines, it's about putting the consumer and citizen first. Focusing on big fines makes for great headlines, but thinking GDPR is about crippling financial punishment misses the point. She does go on to say that it does give more powers in terms of the maximum fines, and a lot of you will now know that can be 20 million euros or 4% of your turnover. But I mean, this is quite an interesting, I think it's quite an interesting statistic actually from last year in 2016, 2017. If we have a look on the screen here, the ICO actually concluded or intervened, if you like, in nearly 17,500 cases relating to sort of data breaches, data protection, data security, and so on. And 16 of them resulted in fines. So it's definitely scaremongering to suggest that organisations are going to be penalised heavily financially for minor infringements, or that suddenly you'll be reading in the papers about everyone getting these huge 20 million euro fines. So that's just not the case. So I wanted to start with that really to say, again, although it is important, compliance is extremely important, what it's easy to do, I guess, is to sort of rush into wrong decisions and sort of make snap judgments based on this. And there are, as I've said at the start, there are unscrupulous organisations who are trying to exploit that worry that your organisation is going to get big fines. It's not about that. It's about more power to individuals in terms of what data is held by different organisations. Okay. So, as Joe mentioned, this is broadly the agenda for the rest of today. So we'll run through over the next sort of half an hour, 40 minutes, something like that, and then there'll be a Q&A. So I'm going to talk about the 5 key areas of the regulation. As part of that, we'll be talking about things you need to be thinking about as a training business. So the majority of people who've signed up today, hopefully are training businesses. That's the sort of space we operate. So we'll be talking more specifically about as training companies, what that means to you. We'll talk a little bit about what we do and how we can help, and as I mentioned, some questions at the end. So let's dive straight in then. And what are the 5 key areas of GDPR I want to be talking to you about today? And again, some of you will probably have read about some of these already. So number 1 will be the rights of data subjects. So data subjects, in this case, being the individuals whose data we're storing, processing, and so on. The security side of things, lawfulness and consent, so that's about when you can use data, accountability of compliance, and protection by design. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump into each of these areas in turn and just talk about them all in a little bit more detail. So again, this is no substitute for reading more thoroughly outside of this, but it's a nice taster perhaps for some of these people aren't familiar with these areas. some of you probably will already be sort of, hopefully sort of fairly well versed in some of these things. Okay, so I'm actually going to start with a screenshot. Again, very timely. This came through to my inbox yesterday, so this was actually to my private email account. And you will probably have had a lot of these recently. So these are updating user privacy notices. And I'll talk about why we're getting a lot of those through at the moment. So that's a nice example one. Naturally, further in that email, there's a link that takes you through to a very thorough and quite detailed and well laid out privacy notice, which clearly explains how eBay is going to use my personal information. So that's a nice example. I guess we could look at it from a worse example, and that's to look at Facebook. And again, I'm sure across all the people attending the webinar, the majority of you perhaps use Facebook, and what you'll have noticed recently is obviously a lot of updates to the privacy policies and things you have to reread and agree to, on the back of, as it turns out, some very bad data practices about what your data was being used for. So again, we'll perhaps allude back to that a little bit later on. So those two tie in nicely with the first bullet point on here. So we're talking about the rights of the data subjects themselves, and it's the right to be informed. And with that eBay one, they're telling me clearly about my data is going to be used for. So it's about that informing. So again, I've got a few more bullet points on this just talk. So effectively, individuals have the right to be informed about the collection and use of their personal data. And it's that transparency that's key under GDPR. So what do you need to do? You must provide individuals with information including your purposes for processing their data, retention periods for data, who it's going to be shared with, and that's your privacy information. So you must provide that information to people at the time you collect their personal data from them. So as a training business, you need to be clearly able to tell your delegates what you're going to use their data for, who it's going to be shared with, and so on. So again, lots of different types of training companies here on the call today. So you will have their data for different reasons, and you'll store it for different reasons. And later on, I'll talk a little bit about retention and why training companies in particular need to store that data. So again, you need to have a very clear privacy policy. So that's a good step in the right direction. The right of access, quite a straightforward one, really. So it's access, really, most people talk about this, is people upon request will be able to access their personal data. So you will need to be prepared to be able to provide copies of individuals' data upon request. In the vast majority of cases, you'll have to do this free of charge, so you need to consider how easy it is for you to do that request as well. So again, as a business, you need to start looking at, if you haven't already, where you're storing all that information about individuals, and how easy it is for you to get to that data if someone were to ask you. It's almost worth doing that sort of a dummy exercise. What if client X, Y, or Z requested a copy of all their information? How easy would that be to pull together? And again, depending on maybe how sort of technologically advanced you are as a business, that might be easier than others. If you've got a lot of things still in filing cabinets and stuff like that, you can appreciate that's going to become a real headache for you as a business. So again, it's a really good opportunity for you to be reviewing what you're doing with that data. So that's about allowing people to access the data you hold on them. The right to rectification, a fairly straightforward one there. That again, it allows people to say to you, well, this information about me isn't correct. So they can actually ask for you to make changes. Again, perhaps if you've got email addresses wrong, phone numbers, names are spelled wrong, things like that, they have got a right for that data to be requested. And you need to respond within a calendar month to a request. So again, that as a bit similar to the access one, really, in many ways. You need to make sure as a training business, do you know where all that is? Because if you've got multiple spreadsheets, databases, paper copies of things, how are you going to actually change someone's personal details on all of those different areas? You probably can do it. Again, how much of a headache it's going to be. Again, is there a way of streamlining that, making it an easier process to do? Okay. Also, the other thing I would say on that is a self-service approach to rectification is quite nice. So again, with something like eBay, going back to that example, if I noticed any of my information was wrong, well, I'd just log in and I'd change it in my account area. I could do that myself very easily. So again, if you can give that sort of access to the people you work with, your delegates, students, learners, whatever your terminology is, again, that's quite nice. So again, I'll come back to that a little bit later on. The right to erasure. So this isn't a reference to the 80s synth pop legends, but rather the right, if you like, to be forgotten, as it's sometimes called. So again, you might actually hear about that, the right to be forgotten. In other words, people can request that you delete their data. Now, there's certain rules around that because, of course, you don't have to comply with that if you need their data. And we'll come on later as we talk about one of the other sort of 5 key areas about, I guess, why you're holding data and what you're using it for. So again, that is the right of the individual to request that. It doesn't mean you have to comply. But again, you need to think of this also in line with things like data retention. If someone asks for their details to be deleted, and you're still holding stuff from 10 years ago on them, which you've never looked at or never used, I think that's a very reasonable request by them. So again, that's the sort of thing to think about within there as well. And also, what information are you currently holding that pertains to individuals as well? Is there anything you're storing that you don't need to, which might actually sort of ring alarm bells to an individual, and that might initiate their request for that. The right to restrict processing is basically the right to request the restriction or suppression of personal data. Again, they can request that verbally or in writing to you, and there's different cases. Again, the same as before, they've got a calendar month, or you've got a calendar month to respond to that request. But again, it's worth thinking about, are you able to convey within your organisation about what you are using someone's data for? Would you ever get to a situation where you could see that happening, that someone would say, I don't want you using our data for this cause? So again, if you are ever sharing with third parties and things like that, again, that's something quite nice to consider. Next one's the right to data portability. And this is a right that allows individuals to obtain and reuse their personal data for their own purposes across different services. And the idea is it is done in a safe and secure way without hindrance to usability. So again, as a business, how easy would that be for you? So if, I suppose a typical one, again, we'll talk about software here, obviously a space we're familiar with. Maybe you are using or maybe, you use a piece of software. Think about you being the data subject here, and you want to move to another supplier. How easy is it, to get that information and then pass it on to another supplier? Now, again, if people ask you for their data, again, you'll be required to give it in a format that is easily usable. So it tends to be things like Excel or CSV files, and again, you'll need to do that free of charge. There may also be a requirement to transmit the data to another organisation if it's technically feasible. So again, that's just something to bear in mind. How easy is it for you to do that? Right to object. Particular, I suppose, with this one, again, it is the processing based on different interests, and probably direct marketing is a good use of that. They are able to object. If their data was being used for direct marketing and they did object to it, you would need to stop immediately. Okay, so again, that's the last right. So that's really about the data subjects, and you just need to be of the mindset of what it is that they could come to you and they could say, that all of these legitimate grounds for them coming to you. So you need to make sure that you could address all of these. So again, that's a really good point to take away. So the second area, I know I covered quite a lot on that one, but I'll go through the others a little bit quicker. So security of processing within here. Okay, so just read the bullet points on your screen there. So the security measures need to apply to all information. So again, as I said at the start, a lot of different mix of organisations on this webinar today. Some of you will be probably more security conscious than others. Some of you will use a lot more in the way of IT systems, which inherently, I guess, have security built in. Data breaches will have to be reported to authorities within 72 hours, and if in high-risk situations, the individual needs to be informed. So I'll just go to the next slide on here, and let's have a look at a few of these companies. So what do these all have in common? So over the last couple of years, these have all been victims of data breaches. Okay, so some of those you might have heard of, others not. Yahoo was probably the granddaddy of all data breaches, because there were 3 billion user accounts that were all affected from a data breach that took place a couple of years ago. 3 billion. You can imagine that's obviously a very, very, very serious data breach. These do, continue to happen as well. Just this year, 150 million users affected by use of MyFitnessPal app have had personal details leaked in the data breach. So it is the sort of thing that can happen. You might think to yourselves, well, we're just a training company, we're nothing like these sort of organisations. Again, it doesn't mean you shouldn't be taking data breaches very seriously. You should, regardless of the size of your organization. I've just picked some high-profile ones. So again, really, I think the implication of this is you need to consider your security processes. And again, as part of GDPR, it's a good time to review them. Hopefully, you think about this beforehand. This isn't a new thing. But again, it's a good chance to review that. And also, you need to consider what sort of data you're holding on people, because really that might define really what level of security you ultimately move to. So if you are holding things like credit card information, bank details, or other personal information that's considered more sensitive, that might be any information about criminal records, it could be personal information about disabilities, lots of different things, and again, there's good definition on the ICO website about this. Then you probably need to, well, not probably, you definitely need to make sure that sort of data is very secure, and that it's stored in a way that again, will make it very difficult to be accessed. So again, just think about that, because really as an organization, it isn't a one-size-fits-all answer. Not every company will need to have the same level of security as another one. So again, you need to consider what sort of data you are holding. You do need some level of security, but again, it might, for some people, it's going to be a lot more than others. So just bear that in mind. Also, as part of the measures, you need to be able to restore access and availability to personal data in a timely manner, the rules say. So again, just bear that in mind. That will also impact how you store information and how would you get that information back should anything happen. So again, a bit of, some of the we're thinking really about disaster recovery and worst case scenarios here. So that's the second bit. Again, data security should already be something you're very familiar with. And I wouldn't, I'm sure there's no one on the webinar today who doesn't have some aspect of that in place. Lawfulness and consent is quite interesting. So there are 6 available lawful bases for processing personal data, and those single bases is better or more important than others. And I suppose this is probably, again, a good time to do a bit of myth busting. So I'm just going to walk through these again very quickly, a few of these points on here, and then I'll sort of talk about that. So consent would be an individual giving you clear consent to process their data for a specific purpose. So you go to a website, might tick a box to say, yes, you can use my data for this reason. A contract, I might, as a business, we might need to use someone's personal data to carry out one of our contracts. That's perfectly valid. A legal obligation would be, we need it to comply with the law. Vital interest, a bit of an odd one. It doesn't really apply to us, and as training businesses, I'm not sure, possibly, but it'd be processing data that's necessary to protect someone's life. I suppose, actually, if you were to do certain training courses where you may need to capture information about people's health, potentially that's the reason you're storing that detail. Public task, that relates usually more to local authorities than public figures. And legitimate interests would be, again, that's probably a bit more open to interpretation. So legitimate interest would be, it might be sort of to perform your business, business as usual. But I think perhaps in the training world, a bit of a myth, or well, not even the training, but beyond, would be stuff like, someone hasn't consented to receiving marketing emails, they haven't ticked the opt-in box. Well, that means I can't contact them with things like, a set of joining instructions or booking confirmation or a course reminder or a post-course certificate. That's not true. That doesn't, the consent there, that is part of, well, either that would be contractual if it's something you say you have to do for that client, but also that definitely falls into legitimate interests. And also, I don't think people worry about that, but again, I've seen that sort of myth around that you can't, if someone hasn't opted in to be emailed by you, that you can't contact them. That's not true. You can use their data again for other reasons. And just read again at the top there, no single basis is better or more important than the others. So again, that's quite an important concept to get your head around there as well. Accountability of compliance. Again, you'll probably be aware, increased presence of regulators and the fines we've already talked about. Definitely going to miss those bits in everything that's been said about GDPR. I just want to talk actually a little bit on this one about the differentiation between data controller and data processor, and also a couple of other terms as well, which would be the data subject, which we've already talked about, and data protection officer also comes up as well. So again, let me just sort of run through a few of those. So what do these mean? The data controller is you. It's your company. It's your company's responsibility to define what the purpose of capturing data is, and to use this responsibly. But you may use a data processor. So in this diagram, the data processor is a software vendor, but it could be any company that you outsource to undertake work, which brings them in contact with personal data, so any third parties. Software for us makes most sense to talk about, that's what we do. As a change under GDPR, it means actually the data processor has more responsibility as well, and the compliance becomes more of a shared responsibility. As a business, that's, I guess, been important to us as a software supplier, because it means although we're not ultimately responsible for you being GDPR compliant, it is, again, we need to make sure, again, that people who work with us are very confident that we are doing everything we can to help them be compliant. Again, we can't ultimately dictate whether or what you do with your data, but again, there's certain things we can do as a software company. So again, just on the back of that, it's important that you look at that. So look at who it is you use, for what software you use, for what purposes you use it, and is your software helping you or hindering you towards GDPR compliance? So again, that's quite nice. The other thing I'll talk about just very briefly is you may have heard about data protection officers. And again, I've seen a bit of a myth doing the rounds on LinkedIn that all companies need to have a separate data protection officer. That's not true. Again, there's an ICO website, more details on this. But there will be some people processing carried out by the public authority. It might be large scale, systematic monitoring of individuals, so behaviour tracking, things like that, you would need to have one. Or if your core activities as a business relates to things like criminal convictions offences, you would need a data protection officer. For most training companies, probably not. There may be the odd person on here who does need to consider that. But again, a bit of a myth, you definitely need one. No, it's probably it'll be the exception rather than the rule, actually. Okay. But again, you know, if in any doubt, refer to that ICO website or do ask the ICO. I'll talk about that later on. So the fifth step in the process, protection by design. Again, hopefully fairly straightforward, really. There's a nice checklist actually on the ICO website about this, so it's to get you thinking about it. So just have a read through those bits on the screen. It's really data minimization and also data retention we'll talk about here as well. So in terms of the information, what is it you're capturing on people and what are you using that data for? So are you capturing data unnecessarily? So in the past, what we've seen is a lot of organizations try to capture as much information as they can about their customers, about their delegates or learners, students in the training world, usually with the view that it helps them on later with marketing efforts. Okay, so yeah, in years gone by, that might be the case where you want to capture as much information as you can about people because you think that means you might be able to sell more to them. You know, that's a really good example. Well, that's a major shift in thinking. What you need to now think about is what's the minimum amount of data we can capture that will allow us to do our job, to perform our service, and not capturing all this sort of extraneous data as well, and only using data for the purpose it's been collected for. As part of this, let's also talk about data retention. So also you need to start thinking about how long you hold data for and what justification you have for holding that personal data again. So a common example, I suppose, in the training industry might be, a lot of you will offer courses or qualifications that have a certification period where it only lasts for a certain period of time, very common with things like health and safety training. You could justify that you need to hold the data about the individual, about those qualifications, at least for the period the certification is valid, because of course people, your customers will come back to you, I'm sure, time to time and say, oh, I can't remember when my first day at work certificate's due to expire. Can you print me another copy of the certificate, and so on. So as part of really your business operating, you will of course need that data. But do you need to keep data on people who's had certificates that have expired 10 years ago? No, probably not. And again, you need to, there's no one-size-fits-all rule for this either. So sorry, I can't help you there. I can't tell you exactly what your data retention period should be, but you need to be thinking along those lines. You know, how long do I need to be holding this information for? Okay. So there's the one line, actually. I'll put the line at the bottom there. So again, just have that one line in your head when you're thinking about your data. What data you capture? What's the minimum amount we need to provide our service? Okay. So they're the 5 areas. So hopefully that's been, I guess, been a whistle-stop tour to some of the areas, but hopefully quite interesting. Just really a bit of food for thought about the sort of things you should be thinking for, you know, on the road to GDPR compliance. So What we've also done is we've put together a checklist, so you'll see that on the screen here. I'm not going to read through all of these, but again, I'll just leave that up for a moment or two. So this is the checklist really we've put together that will help you on your way to GDPR compliance. So if you have not read all that information on the ICO website, obviously a lot of the content I've talked about today has come directly from there, then do that. I would say that is a great place to start. So I think it's ico.org.uk, tons and tons of different information on there. You can arrange phone calls with them, or you can, and there is live chat on the website. So if you have got specific questions, then you can do that. So we've used that as a business. We've actually phoned them up and said, we're not quite sure what this means for us as a business. Can you help us out? So again, they're happy to do that. It's a service, and there's no charge for that. So again, if you've got any questions, go to the IPO directly. A great starting point there. I guess there's a few common sense things just while you read through these on the screen. Just look at where you currently store your data and what you store. Have a sense check on what you need to keep. Again, is all that information that's in filing cabinets relevant anymore? People tend to keep loads of information just because they don't throw it away. Now's a good time to do it. Again, any information you are going to dispose of or destroy, again, be common sense, do it securely, don't chuck all your information from your filing cabinets in a skip outside the office. That's not a very secure way to dispose of your data. So what I'll do, hopefully you've read through some of those on there. You can get a copy of that information. If you go to, on your screen here, you'll see a web address. I'll just let you jot that down. You can get a copy of this checklist. It comes part of a guide that tells you a little bit more as well. And it's, again, a guide for training companies and sort of overall GDPR compliance. So I'll just leave that on the screen there. If you don't want to go directly to that address, actually, if you go to our main website, which is accessplan.com, and at the top of the screen, you'll see a link to Resource Center. If you go to that, there's loads of, as well as being able to find this checklist, there's loads of other information. Beyond GDPR, a lot of other information for training companies in general, lots of guides and information. So again, that Resource Center is a great area to find lots of interesting content as a training business. Okay, so hopefully you've made a note of that now. So just move on then to the next bit. I'm just going to talk a little bit about us and what we do and potentially how we can help you. So let's start here. So the first thing that I will say is do not be tricked into buying software as a means to become or be GDPR compliant. So what do I mean by that? Again, a lot of scaremongering. But buying a bit of software will not mean you are GDPR compliant. Again, there's a lot of other things outside that we've already covered today. So firstly, don't panic buy anything. I guess that's the key message out of here today. And although we are a software company in our own right, I'm going to talk a little bit about what we do. I'm not trying to say to any of you on the webinar here today to be tricked into buying anything we offer. That's not the case. There's lots of other reasons for buying our software. It will help you become GDPR compliant. But buying it, just buying it as a solution and just thinking that ticks the boxes, of course, that's not true. So that's the first thing to say here. Who are we? I'll talk a little bit about us. So we're a training software company. We've been running since 2001, so we've been around for quite a long while now. We work with lots and lots of different training companies throughout, primarily UK and Europe, but also beyond as well. So dipping our toe in more markets overseas. And really our software is, you can see on the second point there, designed to help training companies with day-to-day running of their businesses. So primarily our software is designed to help training companies streamline processes and automate a lot of manual tasks. Now, as a business, data security is hugely important to us because, as we looked at earlier on in that infographic, we are the data processor for our customers. So a lot of personal data will end up in our system. So again, security really key, which is why we're things like ISO 27001 accredited. In terms of who we work with, it is a bit of a mixture of training companies. I mean, I've got some on the screen here, some that you probably recognise as training businesses, others you may recognise outside of that, but training is very much part of what they do, a real mixture. What I would say is we're not industry specific. So again, we'll have people on this screenshot do very different courses, some health and safety first aid, we've got management training, working at height, medical training, training for teachers and beyond. So lots of different types within here. Now, I'll just talk a little bit about, we class ourselves as training management software providers. So what is a TMS or training management software you may hear about. Effectively, it's a tool that is used, as I've mentioned, to help with sort of the day-to-day running of training businesses. But what I would say is we work primarily, our system designed for training companies who offer face-to-face courses. Some might offer e-learning as well, which we support. The majority probably sell courses for profit rather than just run it internally. And yeah, lots of different types of those. Now, what I would say is if you are, I know we've got different people on the call today, if you are from, say, a company that really only deals in apprenticeships, we're not the software for you. There are other companies out there. Again, don't switch off, because what I would like to think is I'm going to show you a few features in our system that help, again, help towards that GDPR compliance. It's worth you looking at those, because it will get you thinking actually about any other software you use. Does it offer similar things? Does it offer this functionality? Should we be looking for that sort of functionality? So even if you aren't a fit for us as an exact customer, it's worth thinking about what the different areas we'll look at there. So yeah, apprenticeships, perhaps if you only offer distance learning, purely e-learning, again, we're probably not the right partner for you. But certainly if you're offering face-to-face training courses that you sell, maybe you sell them online, maybe you don't. Again, this is what we do. So that infographic's really a bit of a summary of what we do there. Okay. So how we can help. So what I'm going to do in just a moment, I'm just going to switch then over to my browser. So give me just one moment to do that, and then I'm just going to talk you through a couple of key areas. Okay. So what I'll start with, on your screen here, you should have our company website, or an example of a company website. So let's talk about the right to be informed, what we talked about a little bit earlier on. So this is an example of a training website, very sort of standard list of health and safety courses, actually just an example website we've built. And as I scroll down the page, I've got some courses listed here, some e-learning, some class. So these are being pulled through actually from our back-end system. And people can find what they're most interested in booking and then go to book the course. So as I click into here, go to book the course, you choose how many places and everything like that. And then in the next step here, okay, have they got an existing account or are they a new customer? Now the key bit here, let's talk a couple of bits about the new customer bit. The first bit is privacy policy. So again, what you can see here is it's pretty clear that when people are first registering their sort of new customers, if you like, with yourself, that you can have a privacy policy displayed. So they can now click on that privacy policy. This is just a dummy one. Actually, it's one you can I found from a website where you can customize it around it. It's a fairly straightforward one. It's basically what are we going to use people's data for? So the privacy policy can easily be accessed from there. So again, that's key, making sure people have got visibility over what their data is going to be used for. Beyond that, the other thing I would say is actually with our system, it isn't a one-size-fits-all approach to what information is gathered during this registration process. So effectively, all the training companies who use our software can capture different information at the point of sign-up. So if someone is a brand new customer, as they go through this registration process, and they will go through things like personal details and company details stuff, you can define what data it is that you want to capture. Because again, what training company A needs to capture and what training company B could be different. Training company A might need people's date of birth because the courses are very much, maybe certain courses can only be for certain people in certain age ranges. So again, that's a legitimate reason to capture that information. Whereas company B, doesn't matter, anyone can come on the course. We wouldn't expect they would capture date of birth. So again, that's just you thinking about that sort of minimum data you need to capture. Okay. Now, you might also say this privacy policy, well, that's great for somebody signed up online, but what if someone phoned up and booked a course with us? How would we get that privacy policy in front of them? Well, that might be via email. Again, our system would help with things like automatically emailing people. So if we did go through and complete this booking, that would send emails out then to whoever's booked this course. And as part of that, you might want to include within those emails things like your privacy policy as well. So again, it doesn't have to be from this online source. But again, that's just something to bear in mind. So what I'm going to do actually, I'm going to log into the back-end system as an admin user. Now, as I log in as an admin, it is worth noting that you can set things like your password policy in here as well. So if you are using our software from a back-end, all your admin users, you can enforce things like the minimum password length, number of uppercase, lowercase characters, and so on, as part of your general sort of security methodology within your business. So it's worth mentioning that. So while logging as Joe here, who's our example user, And as I come into the system for the first time, I hit this dashboard area. Now, this dashboard is used for tons and tons of different things. It's very customizable. You can basically choose, if you like, what information you want to see here for a series of mini reports is the best way to think of it. And what I've actually included for today's webinar is a gadget we've got on here that shows me how many people are within my database that I haven't updated their records at all in the last 12 months. Because this might be a key to start thinking about, do I need to actually start looking at those people and removing their, deleting their records or removing data? Because it might be, again, as part of your data retention periods, it's a good time to review that. So you can have things like that on your dashboard. I mean, I'm sure on your screen you're probably interested in some of the other things on there as well, which are much more sort of course orientated. It's not for today to talk about all of those, but again, some really useful information can be pulled on those. So it might be actually now, moving on from that, perhaps we'll go into a bit more depth and look at individuals and what information we're holding on. And what I want to talk about are really three of the rights here. So the right to access, to erasure, and to portability in this data. If I just go into this page in the system, this is now displaying me a list of all the people we've got within the system. And what we can then start to do is start to think about, as I say, those things. So right to access, to erasure, to portability. So let's say someone comes to me and they want their data, they want a copy of all the data we are holding, the right to access. How easy is it to export that information? And this is where the system is very useful. So you can tick the people or people even that you want to export information on. So I can now export. Now I'm not restricted to just picking this information within the table, which you can choose anyway. I can actually pick, you can see from a whole wealth, a whole huge amount of different information. So that might include things like marketing opt-in. You can see this is within there. So loads and loads and loads of information in there. So at this point, I can then take that and I can export that. I guess taking that one step further, we could talk about the right to portability here, because it might not be that, but they might say, I want a copy of my data because I want to give it to another supplier. I'm moving to another company. Again, very similar. It could be at this point we export that data. It could be then we are actually asked to directly send that to a new supplier again. Obviously, that needs to be done securely. So again, those two rights are quite key there. Other thing probably to mention, right to erasure. So if you did look at, so I guess we could look at some of these records actually on this page, but just cancel that. We can see, and if we were to reorder by when people were last updated in the system, we can have a look. We could then see, we can filter on this. Again, very useful, these data grids. You can filter on any of the information within here or beyond. So we could look for all people who perhaps haven't been updated, their records haven't been updated for a certain period of time. And from there, then we could look to delete them. So it could be we've got obsolete data. This is all fake data, by the way. So we could just delete out here that information. So again, that right to erasure is quite important there as well. Now we'll do actually, let's just reorder that because I'll find some users, I'll find a couple of example users who I tend to talk about at this stage. Let's just reorder that. So the other thing then, let's look at someone's record and what sort of data we might want to hold on them. Oh, again, that will be largely up to you, but just a few of the other options in there. So if I go into a lady called Gail Shepherd, she's typically my example user, and I'll go into her record. And this is where, of course, then you will start to see other information in here as well. One of the other things just to note here, you'll see that things like the password and confirm password boxes are blank. Again, even as an admin, you don't get rights to see people's passwords. You can reset them. But again, for security reasons, we don't allow that. But importantly, I suppose on this one, the bit I want to talk about is in the contact section here. And what we've got here, our preferred methods of contact, and most importantly, the marketing opt-in here. So again, obviously, we're all very aware that the rules around marketing have changed, that people now need to opt in. You can no longer have any of these unchecked boxes, something that's pre-ticked that they have to sort of untick. So the marketing opt-in really is very key. And actually, our system does a little bit more with that. Which I'm going to show you in just a moment. The other thing actually to note in a user record as well is that you've also got down the bottom here audit logs. So our system will actually keep tracks of all changes to any user's record, and it will track things like when those changes are made. It does that to any object in the system. So again, it's quite a nice tool anyway to talk about. So again, anything changed, updated, deleted, and so on gets captured in the audit log, which again for GDPR is quite a useful tool as well. So let me just go back to my user record. And let's say then, you could see actually Gail was ticked that she can accept marketing emails, which is fine, but not everyone will be. So let's pick Gail, let's pick Yvette Richards here. Let's just pick those two. And let's say we want to send them out now a marketing email. So if I go to email these two from here, and if I pick my type of e-campaign, that really lets the system know that we are sending a marketing email. So from here, I might choose some different types of marketing email, because actually you can allow people to sort of opt into one and not the other. It's not uncommon to see people opt into a newsletter, but opt out of promotions. And what we'll do then is we'll just pick from some templates I've built. Don't worry about what they are. So this is just a test e-campaign. And if I go to send that now, we'll see it's quite interesting, this one. So one email's been sent. So basically Gail, she was ticked. She's happy to receive marketing emails. So that's gone out. But Yvette Richards, in this circumstance, she's not opted in to receive marketing emails. So our system's actually stopped you accidentally sending someone an email that they shouldn't receive. So again, that really helps our clients remain compliant. There's no risk of sending things accidentally. Now, just harking back to what I said earlier, if Yvette Richards actually books onto a training course, she would receive things like the booking confirmation, and she would receive post-course certificate survey, things like that, if you've got those set up, because they are part of, your service to her. That's part of the business. So really, this is, again, it's sort of separating out what people's data is used for, and it's not always exactly the same. Okay, so what I'll also do, I'll show you an example. This is actually an example of a mailbox. Again, it's for Gail. So this is a very similar. This is sent her a marketing email. This is a template I've built. So within here, it's telling her about completing a course, well done, and maybe book another course. But crucially, any marketing or e-campaign email sent from our system has to have an unsubscribe link embedded within them. So again, you can't actually send them without, which again is very useful. So from this point, Gail may say, I no longer want to receive these sort of emails, and choose to unsubscribe. Now they can do it that way. The other way you can do it is actually individuals can be given access to their own My Account, My Own portal area. I won't log in as Gail and show it, because I can show you it from the context of Joe Brown, but this would be like a learner's view. And it's a nice design. It's all mobile friendly, so people can access it from any device. It will resize and reshape dynamically. But as part of this, and again, this area isn't used obviously just to allow people to amend their details, but it's used to show which courses they're on, to access pre-course information, post-course information, lots of other stuff. It would typically be rebranded to whichever training company we work with. But as part of it, it does give them that right to rectification. So Joe now could correct details if anything's wrong. So within his menu options, you'll be able to see a My Details section. Okay, and within here we can see, so it might be Joe now doesn't want to receive marketing emails, so rather than unsubscribe from an email per se, it could just become login and set to no, and that would then opt him out in the back end. But again, or update any of those personal details that are on there. So again, things like a My Account area adds a bit of value. It's something quite nice to do, and again, you could get the system to sort of send out the credentials and login area for that as well. So again, that's just another area where we can help. Okay. So I'll leave it at that. I didn't want to, today's not a demo or anything like that. It's just a few of the areas to think about and how we can help people remain compliant. But sort of conscious with one eye on the clock that we need to hand over, I think, some questions at this stage. What we're going to do actually is I'll just bring Joe back. Joe, during the session here, I know it's been very quiet, but what he's been doing is monitoring the questions as they've come in. So I think he's going to pick out a few questions and we'll go through those. So just bear with me one moment. I'll bring Joe back on the line. Okay, I think we're back on the line. I think we'd fallen off for some reason there. So yeah, thanks for whoever's just said we've cut out there. Let's try again, shall we? So yeah, Joe, you've got some questions, I believe.
Yeah, thanks very much. We've had a whole raft of questions through today. A lot of interest in today's webinar. So I've just picked out the most frequently asked from those boxes. So the first one, Andrew, is, does GDPR only apply to organisations within the EU?
Oh yeah, yeah, it's a good point actually, and I think I did talk about. I suppose a lot of there'll be a mixture of training companies here today that might have customers overseas as well, and what are the rules? The rules are about the rights of individuals within the EU, but that doesn't mean it doesn't apply to companies outside the EU. So theoretically, and this is actually why, probably a good example of people like Facebook, why you've noticed things like changes to privacy and so on. So although they're not actually centred or based in Europe, they are conscious because those companies need to live by the same guidelines as anyone else. So if they are processing data of individuals within the EU, yes, they need to apply with GDPR. What they do outside of that, I'm not sure with the separate US laws, but yeah, they definitely do.
I guess that leads quite nicely onto a separate question that's been asked a lot today, which is, what effect does Brexit have on GDPR?
Oof, the two hottest topics of our time there, Joe, Brexit and GDPR, yes. Brexit won't affect GDPR. Again, although obviously we're talking about leaving the EU, the GDPR guidelines have been adopted here by the ICO. They're not going to change again. They will stand. So no, Brexit doesn't mean that we can avoid it, unfortunately.
Okay. And consent is always going to be always going to be a great topic for questions today. And with the question asked quite frequently was, do I always need consent?
I assume that means to contact someone. I think that was, yeah. So I think going back to the slides earlier on, there's those number of different reasons you've got for using someone's data, and as I talked about, no one of those is more important than any other. So there are, consent is just one of 6 lawful bases for processing data. So it won't always be the most appropriate one to choose. So again, it depends on the context really. You'll need to decide as an organisation which of those 6 reasons, I guess, are most applicable to that scenario within your business. Again, if you're unsure at all on stuff like that, I'd say contact the ICO and they'll be able to give you a bit of advice.
Okay, so on to the next one. So how long do I have to reply to a subject access request? So I assume this is someone requesting the data that you're holding on them. Yeah,
I mean, that's interesting. I mean, again, the guidelines say you've got a month, but there is this sort of concept of a reasonable request in there. And also because we talked about being free earlier as well, but on those points, if someone has come to you and the request is perhaps unreasonable in terms of the complexity or the volume or something like that of the information they want, then yeah, you can get an extension and you can apply for that. I think it's a 2-month extension. Also, if it's particularly arduous or it's unreasonable what they're asking of you, in certain cases you could even charge. But the majority of the time, probably the rule of thumb to work to is you'll have to do it free, and most times within a month.
Okay, and this one's quite an interesting question. So if you're a small company, so this is a company that employs less than 30 people, for example, do you still need to comply?
Yeah, it's a simple answer to that one. Everyone. It doesn't matter what your size of business is. You know, every business out there will be capturing personal information. Again, GDPR is about individuals' rights about their data. So it doesn't matter whether my data resides with a one-man band or resides with Microsoft. It's still the same concept applies. So yeah, everyone it applies to.
And final question that we're going to pick out today, which is, what do I need to do if a data breach occurs?
Oh yeah, that's a good one. Now that is very much circumstantial. For example, if the breach is likely to result in a high risk where the data leaked is going to affect individuals' rights and freedoms, then you must inform those individuals straight away. So that might be, I suppose, going back to some of the examples earlier, that might be credit card details being leaked. You would, if a company leaked your credit card information, of course, they'd have to tell you as an individual immediately. However, in other cases where it might be email addresses have gone, Again, that's not considered as personal information, as personal, it's personal, but not as serious, if you like. So what you need to do internally, really, is start thinking about what happens in data breach, but not in a one-size-fits-all. So what you need to start thinking about is, well, actually, if there is a data breach, what sort of data breach would make this really serious, where we'd have to tell every individual immediately and report it to the ICO as quickly as we could? Whereas, what would be considered something that was more, occasionally there might be a human error, which is perhaps less serious in terms of the implications of that. So what I would say is, again, there's no one answer to this. It's a case of you thinking about the severity, really, of that breach, I think.
We've got a few minutes left, Andrew, so I'm just going to ask you one final question, which has just come through, which is, can users opt out of different marketing email lists if you have multiple training companies set up within an Access Planet system?
Yeah, if I think I'm hearing the question right. Yeah, I mean, what you can do is you can set up different email types. So hopefully this is what the question alludes to. So I think it was a little bit like I said with newsletters and promotions and things like that, whereby you could have different types of emails which they can opt in and out of. I suppose the multi-provider setups can get more complex. What you couldn't do is if you have one training business that has, say, an office in England, an office in Scotland, and someone opted out from all marketing emails, it doesn't mean, even though they might have opted out because of an email England sent them, it doesn't mean Scotland office could email them, and that's the way it should be because you're still one organisation. So if you did want to go down that route, you could have different email types set up for, I guess, the different, so it could be like England newsletters, Scotland newsletters, and they could then theoretically sort of just unsubscribe from one or the other if they wanted to. Hopefully that's what that meant anyway.
Okay, great. So we're just about out of time, but just to clarify one point which has also come up during questions, everyone will get a recording of today's session, so you will be able to go back and review the content from earlier on in the webinar at your own leisure.
Perfect. Right, well, thank you everyone for attending. You've got actually just on your screen here the final slide, which hopefully you can see there. Should show my contact details there. I'm not sure actually, I'm just looking on my colleague's screen. I'm not sure that's moved across. But yeah, if anyone's got any more follow-up questions, then do get in touch with us. Our office number is 0845 543 0229, or you can always email, there's a central email called inquiries@accessplanet.com, or you can email andrew@accessplanet.com. With any further questions you may have. I really appreciate everyone's time for attending this webinar. Hopefully you found that interesting and gained some value out of it. So yeah, all that remains, thank Joe. Thank you for your introduction, Joe, and thanks from me. And yeah, good luck on your path to GDPR compliance.